Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Why are the Africans poor? This is an interesting question because if you look at Africa in terms of resources, we have a great abundance of resources. And yet, we have remained the poorest continent on earth. One way one can answer that question is looking at this graph. This was produced by the World Bank. It shows the income, the GDP per person from 1990 to 2023. The GDP per person of the rest of the world is the one shown in orange. And you can see a steady growth in that period. And the GDP for Africa, shown in red, has remained almost flat. According to this article in The Economist, we are the trend, with the current trend, we should be looking at Africans becoming 80% of the world's poor by 2030. This is up from 14% in 1990. When you hear that, if you're an African, you should sit up and listen and really scratch your head. What the hell is going on here? We must do something about it. Africa is poor. Africans are poor because the overwhelming majority of the Africans out there who look at this graph and shrug their shoulders. It's all water of a duck speck. That is the reason why Africa is poor. Countries like Zimbabwe, we have a great abundance of resources. This is a video clip, somebody talking about Zimbabwe's wealth. And how we have resources, a great abundance of resources everywhere.
It already has many firsts. Rhodesia's industry is based on a wealth of natural resources. It has the biggest single coal field in the world and some of the cheapest coal. It has the world's largest deposits of chrome, lithium, and high-grade asbestos. It has the finest emeralds and almost unlimited quantities of iron ore. Rhodesia is second only to the United States in tobacco exports. It's the world's sixth largest producer of gold. It has too cobalt and copper, lead and zinc, tin and tantalite, mica, beryllium, silver and diamonds. It is self-sufficient in
Well, the list could go on. In the early 80s, a Japanese scholar, Ken Yamamoto, said Zimbabwe had the potential to become the South Korea of Africa. And yet, it didn't take no more than just 2 decades for Zimbabwe to become one of the poorest countries in Africa. We've become the North Korea of Africa, ruled by ruthless tyrants who care about nothing but their own wealth. That is the tragic reality in Zimbabwe. Here is British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher talking about on that very point of how a nation's wealth, economic potential is not always realized.
Countries are not rich in proportion to their natural resources. If they were, Russia would now be the richest country in the world. Angola would be very rich, and there are many other countries that have a lot of natural resources, but they have not had an enterprise economy to develop those resources. Russia has everything: oil, gas, diamonds, platinum, gold, silver, timber, marvelous soil, but has been poor. She's also, on the second point, got very bad environment, the Aral Sea. I remember going to one communist country in about the 60s and seeing a powder coming out of a chimney of brown gas, which of course is a nitrous gas. And I was absolutely horrified. I said, well, what are you doing letting that happen? The lungs of the people must be terrible. This is acid. You can't let that go on. Tact has never been my strong point, as you know. And it is the countries that have had the wrong system, which have not created the wealth, have not cared about people. Look at the other side. Japan, no natural resources. Switzerland, no natural resources. Taiwan, no natural resources. It is the political system which enhances the enterprise of the people and gives it a framework within which to operate, which will deal with this poverty.
Of course, she is right. We have known this all along. We can't pretend that we didn't know this. Zimbabwe's economic meltdown, the root cause of Zimbabwe's economic meltdown, is pure and simple a case of bad governance. Of course, Mnangagwa and company would want to give all manner of excuses. One of their favorite is that Zimbabwe has been subjected to economic sanctions. Even those who do not understand what these sanctions are, by now we should be smart enough to ask, okay, Zimbabwe has been subjected to economic sanctions. But what is it within our own power to run the economy better that we should have done and have done nothing? That is important. Things like corruption. Even ZANU-PF will admit that corruption is a serious problem. One has got to ask, why then have we done nothing to end corruption? We can't do anything about sanctions. We are not the ones who impose them. But what about corruption? This is a homemade problem. What about the issue of bad governance? The failure to hold free, fair, and credible elections so that leaders are accountable to the people. This is a homemade problem. Why have we failed to resolve those problems? It is tragic that Africa has so much potential, so many resources, and yet it remains the poorest continent on earth. The emphasis there is, it is not the potential or the wealth, natural wealth and resources that matter the most. It is the people. Yes, we need quality leaders, but you do not get quality leaders when you do not have quality electorate either. The Zimbabwe electorate, I think, is one of the most ignorant, naive, and gullible people on earth. And that has not augured well with producing quality leaders. Ever since the late 1990s, the country had come to a consensus that we needed the opposition whose number one task would be to implement democratic reforms to stop ZANU-PF rigging elections. After 24 years, MDC, CCC have failed to implement even one token reform. And you think by now the people would have woken up to that reality and start searching for competent opposition leaders. They haven't. They still worship the opposition as demigods who can do nothing wrong. The truth of the matter is, ZANU-PF has managed to remain in power thanks to the incompetence of the opposition. They failed to implement reforms even when they had the golden chance to do so. And they've been participating in flawed elections to give ZANU-PF legitimacy out of greed. And the people themselves have not woken up to that reality. Tragic. Thank you very much, those who were able to join. Have a good evening.